In this video, we're going to have a look at an absolute instructive game, and also a very exciting one, played between two absolute legends of the game. Former world champions Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand are playing again against each other. And I'm saying again because the two have played countless games against each other. Remember, for instance, their two world championship matches in 2013 and 14 in Chennai and Sochi. We all know that Magnus managed to win these games, but Vishy is still, of course, very, very strong, and maybe he can pull up an upset in this rapid game. It's played in the Global Chess League in London. Time control is 20 minutes for the entire game, and let's see what's going to happen. It's very exciting and instructive, as I said, so I hope you will watch it from beginning till end, as I got a lot to share with you. Well, let's see what happened. As Magnus starts the game with 1c4, and we have the symmetrical English, very reliable, solid system. After the moves knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, all the knights are developed. White played the move d4, it's the principled continuation. Pawn takes, knight takes d4, and here the move e6, and white does have quite a number of options. And by playing the move e4 now, we do actually have the transposition to lines which can also arise via first move 1e4, for instance via the Sicilian. Bishop b4 is a principled continuation to pin the knight on c3, to put pressure on white's center. So white takes on c6, pawn takes c6, and the bishop comes to d3. Interesting pawn structure with white having two pawns on c4 and e4, grabbing a bit of space, but black has an extra pawn in the center. Decides here to play the move e5. All very well-known theory, also for these two superstars, castle kingside by both. And interesting moment, as Magnus has quite a bit of experience with this line, as back in 2018 he played, also against Vishy, the move queen e2. Now there are a lot of different ways of playing, and well, this is not the right place to go into depth of all the subtleties in this line, but here the move h3 was played by Magnus, kind of a useful waiting move. And well, we're going to see what black is going to do. And well, black does have various plans. For instance, one thematical plan could be to drop back with the bishop to c5 and try to control the dark squares in the center. If you, for instance, play a move like d6, then white is gonna consider playing the move knight a4, followed by going after the bishop on the queen side with a3 and b4. You can develop quite some nice play. So for that reason, Vishy is aiming for simplifications. He decides to give up his good bishop for the knight on c3 to double the pawns on the c file, but obviously it will not be easy to target them. Now the move d6 played, and I think that black really wants to play here the move c5 to fix that pawn on c4, and later on with a light squared bishop and maybe with a queen or a knight coming around, that pawn on c4 can become a serious weakness in white's camp. So Magnus comes up with a very instructive idea. He sacrifices the pawn, just getting rid of his weakness. So he says, okay, you can win the pawn, but now, okay, you do get a pawn weakness yourself as well. And basically, in fact, if you evaluate the structure here, that extra pawn on the c file is pretty useless. But question is, what can white try to do with his pieces here? Well, he does have the bishop pair, so opening up the position with the move f4 looks quite interesting. Now you do put pressure against the pawn on e5. As you can see, the pawn on d6 is no longer there to defend the pawn. And if you are going to take on f4, which was not played by Vishy, then well, white's bishops are getting stronger and stronger. There are ideas to play e5, then the light squared bishop will look at the black king, the queen can come into play, the other rook can come over as well. There are serious attacking chances. So instead, and that's also typical of Vishy here, he's not familiar with this exact position, but he's smelling that things can easily go wrong if he's playing careless. So he says, okay, the move c4, I'm giving back the pawn, I'm hitting your bishop. If the bishop is going to take on c4, then everything is getting swapped. You can take on f4 as well. And then at the end there's knight takes e4. That's something you should rather avoid as white. So what Magnus did here is dropping back with the bishop to c2 to keep the pawn defended. And well, it's a very complicated position. There's a big moment here now, as black got to decide whether to exchange queens or not. Now, getting surprised in the opening, exchanging queens is usually a safe way out, but perhaps a move like queen a5 to maintain control over the e5 square and counter-attacking the pawn on c3 is a more ambitious move. But let's see what happened in the game, as instead Vishy exchanged queens here on d1. Rook takes d1, pawn takes f4, bishop takes f4. Still, black is a pawn up, but once again, I don't think that the extra pawn on the c file is really relevant here. So bishop e6, bishop is coming into the game, and now rook a b1. Excellent move, as you do control the open file, and look at that bishop. It's taking away the b8 square from any of these black rooks, so white is about to enter with that rook on the 7th rank. What to do against it? Well, not that simple, but you can try to challenge that bishop on f4, and you can do it with the move h6. Now white played the move a4, very instructive move as well, as white wants to bring up the pawn to a6. If that pawn is there, then the only thing you really want to do is win the pawn on a7. You can do that with the help of the bishop and the rook, and then all of a sudden that passed pawn becomes a serious weapon for white. So Vishy played the move a5, preventing further expansion on the queen side from white's a pawn. Rook b7, the rook comes in, and look at this, knight h5. You're attacking that the bishop on f4, and well, there are many squares to go. Difficult to say what is best. To me, the move bishop e3 seems quite logical, as the bishop now still has possibilities to come to b6 at some point and to try to win the pawn on a5. Now, well, first, the move g5 was played. Also interesting. You could have considered other moves as well, but the plan is to get that knight into to f4. White played king f2, and as announced, the knight comes to f4, and well, I think the plan here, for instance, could be to play knight d3. You don't mind giving back the pawn, as the resulting endgames, once you take on d3 and take back with the pawn and then with the rook, well, it's opposite colored bishops, with dark squared bishop for white and light squared bishop for black. Drawing chances are pretty clear. So white decides here to trade off the knight on f4. Pawn takes, king f3. Now it is rook fd8. And you can see that now the bishop is gone and black is trying to infiltrate, trying to become active with his own rook. For instance, if you do take on d8 and then carelessly taking the pawn on f4, the rook comes into d2. And it's actually black who all of a sudden has the more promising position. So instead, well, there are once again various options, but Magnus said, well, I'm dropping back with the rook to b1, as he doesn't want to allow a black rook to enter. Look at this, rook takes rook, rook takes back. Now white is controlling the d file and black is going to occupy the b file, so the rook is about to come to b2. Looks very dangerous, but you can take here with the king, the pawn on f4. Rook comes to b2, attacking the bishop, but now excellent move. You accept that your rook is going to a slightly inferior position, but the rook is defending the bishop is defending the pawn, and at this point the pawn on c3 cannot be attacked by a black piece. So you can see that having the queen side under control, white is basically playing with an extra pawn on the other side of the board, but whether that's enough to break through, we will see. King f8, king comes to the center, king e5, white is activating his own king as well, king e7, and the king comes to d4. Well, the pawn is still defended, but there are plans now, for instance, to come with the king to c5. So, king d6 played, and well, if black does get some time here, he is going to play the move c5 to kick the king backwards, maybe put a pawn on f6, plays his own king on e5, and it's actually white's king who is going to be forced to go back. So here white played the move e5 to give a check, forcing the king to go backwards. And now it's time to grab space with the move g4. White is trying to mobilize his pawn majority, and still it's a very unclear position. Feels like a lot of things can happen. I don't really see how white is going to break through, because I think the bishop on e6 is an excellent defender, protecting the pawn, but also keeping an eye on the march of these pawns. But they're followed here. This move, bishop to d5. The bishop is now perfectly protected by the pawn on c6. So the queen side is well defended, but white can now play the move h4. It's something I don't really like to see, but probably Vishy thought, okay, he can go back with the king, and after king c5, he's going to place the king on g7, believing, I assume, that he has a fortress on the king side. But white walks in with the king. Absolutely remarkable, because where is that king going? That is not so obvious yet, but here, now the king is active. The pawn on c3 is not so well defended. So here, Vishy thinks that he can play this move rook a2. White continues with the plan. He is advancing the pawn g5. Pawn takes. Bishop on c2 is preventing the black king from attacking that pawn. And, well, Vishy played here the absolute principled move rook a3, attacking that pawn on c3. And what are you going to do with that pawn on c3? Now, it's absolutely remarkable, because the best move in this position was not seen by both players, but it's the move bishop to b1. Remarkable idea, but the trick is that the rook defends the pawn, and you say that please take the pawn on a4, and then after that your rook is never going to see daylight again. The rook is just completely out of play. And, well, this is difficult to see, and to be honest, the move played by Magnus makes, for the human eye, makes more sense. He played bishop f5, as he says, okay, the bishop is just more active on f5 and supporting the push of either the g or e pawn. However, the main difference is that here still the rook is able to come back, for instance, to a2, and then try to attack the pawn, the bishop, or maybe the other pawn. It's very complicated. So trying to dominate the strongest piece of your opponent is usually a very good strategy. But anyway, black played the principled move, rook takes pawn. But now we see that this bishop on f5 is a fantastic piece, as white comes up with the stunning idea g6. Breakthrough, trying to get rid of black's main defender, the pawn on f7, which was holding both white's pawns. But after pawn takes g6, the rook comes in to g1. There's no time to take the bishop as the pawn is pinned, and defending the pawn with bishop f7. It's actually quite funny that white has only 2 pawns here and black 4, but it's also about the quality of your pawns, and especially that pawn on e5 is really strong. Bishop f7 was not played because of e6. You're attacking the bishop, and you cannot save both your pawn on g6 and the bishop on f7 by going back to e8. There is king e7, and here you see that the king is a fantastic piece in the endgame. Here the bishop is trapped. So that explains the move played in the game, as there followed rook a3. Black is now trying to apply the strategy of eliminating all the remaining pawns. Rook takes g6, check. King goes to f7. Here you gotta be very careful, because the main idea white had in mind by trading off the g pawn for the f pawn is to create a passed pawn. But if you do push it right now with the move e6, Magnus didn't make this mistake. But let me show you. There's bishop takes e6. Of course, you can't take with the bishop, as it drops the rook. But taking with the rook also is not that great, because there is rook takes c3. And all of a sudden, there is this endgame of rook and bishop versus rook and 3 pawns. But even without these 3 pawns, it's a theoretical draw. So that is something which has to be avoided. And of course, Magnus realizes that. Look at this. He goes for a rook f6. Check. The king goes to g7. And now, fantastic idea. The pawn on c3 is gone. And as I said already, pushing the pawn to e6 just leads to the sacrifice of the bishop with a theoretical draw endgame. But Magnus continues with king e7. The king goes further. Rook to b3. I mean, pawn could have been taken as well, but it's also not gonna help. There is a rook to g6. Check, forcing the king to go to h8. But now there is e6, and now the pawn is coming forward anyway. And now all of a sudden there are serious mating ideas in this position. And well, in any case, the king is on its way to f6. So then you create these mating patterns. Black tried here the move a4, king f6. Here we are, a3. And now it's rook h6 with check. King has to go to g8. And now it is bishop h7 check. Fantastic idea. Remember this trick, because usually you're trying to force the king to go to the h file. You see this often in a middle game, in attacking positions. Also in the end game, it works. Usually you're looking for a nice discovered check with your bishop. But this time there is bishop to g6. Sensible move, because after king g8 there is bishop f7 with checkmate. Well, not now. Here Vishy resigned, in fact. Just want to remove king f8. Then it's rook h8 with checkmate. Beautiful idea. But it shows that after bishop h7 the king cannot go to the corner. But also the alternative with king f8 doesn't really help. You can play various moves, but I think the most simple one is to push the e-pawn with check, king e8, bishop g6 check. King has to move, and then you promote your pawn, and it's leading to checkmate very soon as well. So, well, as we have seen already in the game, the king went to the corner, but then after bishop f7, that was the final position of the game. So this was a fantastic masterclass how to play the endgame, and it also shows that you need to use your king. That king, without a king, the mating attack would have never worked, and white would probably also not have been able to create a passed pawn. So it's for multiple reasons why you need to use your king. To create a passed pawn, to use it for a mating attack, to support your own pawns in general. And well, black's counterplay came way too late. So very impressive performance by Magnus. I hope you do like this game as well. Please let me know in the comments what do you think of it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, because I want to reach 7k, 8k, 10k and much more, and I really need your support, guys. So please consider that if you do like it. And then well, very soon I have many more exciting things to share with you, but wait for that, and make sure to come back to the channel very soon. Bye bye.